everyone. Welcome to the Ashley Barlow Company podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host. If you are a parent, a teacher, or someone who works at a school, or you're a community member, a volunteer, or a staff member at an organization that supports people with special education plans, a coach, a tutor, or even a grandparent, you're in the right place. Sit back with an ice cold glass of lemonade, put on your walking shoes and grab some headphones, roll down the windows and cruise. Ready, set, go. Educate, advocate, collaborate. Welcome back to the Special Education and Advocacy podcast with Ashley Barlow. I'm Ashley Barlow, and I'm so happy you're here. Today, I want to welcome Miss Lucy. We are going to have so much fun in this episode. Lucy and I both warned each other that we could both talk on and on forever. And so I think today's episode is going to feel like two friends sitting down talking about special education. Lucy's a preschool teacher, and so I invited her to be on the podcast so that we could talk about things from her perspective as a teacher and also from my perspective as a special education advocate and attorney. So I want to tell you a little bit about Lucy. Lucy is a preschool self-contained teacher. She has her bachelor's and her master's degree in early childhood education and special education. She's from Buffalo, New York, and she says, "Go Bills," and I'm a Bengals fan, so I don't really care. But she relocated to South Carolina in 2014 to pursue her teaching degree. Lucy has been teaching in South Carolina for 7 years. She serves students with a wide range of abilities, ages 3 and 4, all of whom have an IEP. She implements a variety of strategies and methodologies to address each child's specific needs. Lucy is very passionate about advocating for her students, inclusion, and augmentative and alternative communication devices, and we talk a lot about each of those topics in today's episode. You can find Lucy over at her blog, The Alternative Way to Pre-K. She's also on Instagram with the same handle. She's got a Facebook group for teachers, and she's got wonderful products on her Teachers Pay Teachers store. Let's hop into today's episode. I think you're going to think it's a lot of fun. Hi, Lucy.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Today's podcast might go down as the one with the longest pre-record in history. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to have you here. I've enjoyed chatting with you offline and can't wait to share our conversation with my listeners. Why don't we get started with you telling me a little bit about yourself, what you do, how you do it. Just give us a little background.
All right, so my name is Lucy, and I am a special education preschool teacher. I'm going into my 8th year. I've been at the same school and the same program the whole entire time. And really, it's just working with, it's generally the kids' first time in school. We work on a lot of like functional skills, adaptive skills, huge on speech and communication, and just preparing students to get them ready for their school age programs. And within that, I'm also like a very huge advocate for inclusion. So pushing them into Gen Ed as much as possible, but also like we were just talking about pre-recording, like those parent relationships and all that fun stuff, and like communicating with parents is a huge part of going into just working with the kids in the classroom.
Yeah, and that's so huge in preschool because unless you have an older child in special education, you are probably new to it. And as we were saying earlier, there's so many different things to learn, the special education laws and regulations, and then best practice, like what should be happening in the classroom and how to communicate and what all the procedures are and all of those things. And so as a preschool teacher, not only do you have a really hands-on job, but you also have this kind of obligation to help parents really get started in special ed, right?
Yeah, we definitely, there's a lot of hand holding that goes on. Like you said, it's their first time, might even be their first time sending their kid to school, let alone sending them to a special education program. But they're like typically at like a loss. They don't know what's available to them. They don't know what they should be doing. They don't know the laws. They just need help navigating everything. And sometimes we do get those parents that are very knowledgeable on what they need to do, which is great. But part of our job is not just working with the children, it's working with their parents and the guardians to help guide them through this new process. And that one thing we are like, it's always an open line of communication, always, because like they have a million questions and we need to provide those answers.
Yeah, and thank goodness there are teachers like you that take that part of your job seriously and also value the input that you get from the parents also, because that's what we preach here at Ashley Barlow Company. And I say this all the time. I don't really like to talk about Jack's specific education, but there's one person in our administrative staff in our district that's left from his preschool years and no teachers. And I say very confidently and openly that our preschool transition was dreadful, and our preschool experience was also less than ideal. And so I have lived the opposite of being in Lucy's classroom, and it makes me really empathize with people that are in a less than ideal situation.
Yeah, that's usually to like that step from when because I'll have students, my 3-year-olds are half day, my 4-year-olds are full day. So I can have kids for like 1 to 2, 3 years, depending on when they come into my classroom. So usually, I've had 2 to 3 years to get to know this family and the kids. So we build that relationship and that rapport. But then if I get a kiddo that's in like their 4-year-old year, or they come halfway through their 4-year-old year, and we're talking about transitions, it's usually very sensitive subject for all parents too, because like you're entering school age programming, and there's different programming, and there's different like things to like navigate, and like our opinions might be different. And so just navigating that whole process can be tricky, but as long as you keep that open line of communication and that rapport, then you won't have like a negative experience like you had. Like, I know one of your questions was talking about like, what do you do when you butt heads? Like, if you have that rapport already, you guys can just have a discussion. Like, it's the same thing. Like you're allowed to disagree on things. Like, not everyone likes pineapple on their pizza, but it doesn't mean you're going to be a jerk about it. Like, you guys can discuss it and like look at the options as to like, why do you want the pineapple on the pizza? Why don't you want the pineapple on the pizza? And then come to an agreement as to why. And I found, now I'm just kind of rambling.
I love that though. Like that's what that in negotiation strategy, we call that interest-based negotiation. You didn't even realize that you just said it, but why? Not the position, I like pineapple, but question, why do you like pineapple? Because we might be able to get you your interest, your why. Like, and maybe usually like sweet. Okay, well, how about candy? Or whatever it is. So we're going on like a weird tangent, but that's amazing what you just said. Thank you.
Well, and usually the topic that is like, what is the pineapple? Like what we're like the issue is usually that social interactions with general education peers. That's usually what the parents' main concern is. And like, when we look at these transitions, we have two different perspectives. I'm the educator and you're the parent. We both have valuable input. No one's right, no one's wrong. We just have different perspectives. And so usually our perspective as an educator is everything we do is data driven. It's data. So we're going off of our data. And that data can look like test scores and stuff like an assessments, but it also can look like trials in those general education, like we give those opportunities, and how successful they needed, what level of support did they need. So then the big issue comes, well, are they going to go to a self-contained classroom, or are they going to go to a preschool or a general education kindergarten? And like I said, usually the parents' main concern is that social component. So if the team, like the educator side of the team, we're recommending that this child go to a self-contained classroom because they need support, it's a lot of parents like, oh, it's a death sentence. But we're looking at it as, well, no, they're still going to be with their gen ed peers. They're going to get the bulk of their instruction, maybe those 2-3 hours in that self-contained classroom where they can have higher level support. And then we're going to bring them into with their peers. So we're not just like completely X-names that, or we might have the opposite. Parents, like, they want them in a general educate or in a special education classroom, self-contained. And we're like, they need to be in a kindergarten classroom, like they are able to do it. And so if we just talk out like our rationale, both sides rationale, we can generally come to a consensus. And if we don't come to a consensus, we'll go with what the majority of the team kind of like wants. So if it's, you know, we have like the speech therapist and the parent want this and like that kind of thing, you know, we'll go with what we think is going to be the best fit. But we'll also put in like the IEP and the prior notes, like the team's going to, whatever the placement is we choose, we're going to collect data on it for the first 6 weeks and then meet again and see, hey, was this the right choice or was it not? Do we need to adapt it? Do we need to increase minutes? Do we need to decrease minutes? But like,
Play it by ear.
Yeah, you get,
Yeah,
but like,
yeah.
But there's not one size fits all too. Like a lot of kiddos, like they could be successful in both placements, but what's going to be the most successful? And like some of those kids are in that gray area. So it's just kind of like, you got to talk it out. Like, again, communication's key. Like,
Communication is key. You got to talk it out. Communication is key. And, you know, so I talk a lot about this in my inclusion workshop. And so that is like a 3-video series with this really detailed workbook. And what I talk about is, okay, so now we know, like in mediation or negotiation strategy, we call this bracketing. So we know the district wants this setting with these number of minutes, and the parents want this setting with these number of minutes. And so within kind of, you know, educational placement, we now see where the parents are, where the school is, and what we need to do is we need to understand the why. And then what we try to do is we try to see if those two things overlap at all to see if we can find common ground. So like maybe we get that really great support, but if the parents want it to be done in a gen ed classroom, we look at that teacher's schedule and we say, can the teacher maybe push in some services into gen ed? Because that teacher, yes, the teacher from the self-contained classroom does sound like she's got great supports, right? So like, we don't just look at things as a if A then B, or here's I say ABC, you say XYZ. We look for that common ground, and that's what you just described. You know, it's not an absolute yes or an absolute no. There's a lot of gray in the middle. And ultimately, what we're doing is we're all looking for something that's right for a child. And I love that you said, I do this often too. And you know, at some point you roll the dice and you say, okay, this is what we're going to agree on, and if you don't agree, then maybe we can try it for a second, take data, and I'll come back and look to see how it works. I love that. But the key to it all is communication, right?
Well, and something that more so with the communication, and something we talked about prior to recording, was kind of having these like brief discussions prior to the meeting, like what the path that this is going to be. So when the parent sits down at the meeting, you're saying, oh, we think your child go to self-contained. They're not like, what? Like totally caught off guard. Like you have to have those an open line of communication. And like I always send home a draft prior to the IEP meeting, but like, and like it is a draft, and that placement option, it's not definitive until we all, and I always say that, like it is not definitive until we all come to the table. So say, yes, this is what we're going to talk about. This can be changed. Like it's not definitive, like it's an open discussion, but also giving them the opportunity to process. And they can, granted, we'll talk more in depth about it at that IEP meeting, but give them the opportunity to question like why this placement. And a lot of times too, like I'll say, if you're concerned about it, well, pre-COVID, go observe that both settings so you can see both of them in action. So when we do come to the table, you do have a better idea of how those programs operate. I'll even give that, or contact that teacher. So giving them time to look at what the options are even prior to the meeting, instead of just coming to the meeting and be like, this is where your kid's going, this is where we want them to go, and then have them be totally blindsided.
Right. And, I will say to parents, kind of like a bad word in special education is due process. But the purpose of due process is really to put an end to impasse. If you have those conversations and the conversations unfortunately still turn sideways, there is an answer. And the answer can be determined by an administrative law judge. And so, you don't have to look at due process as something really nasty and really stressful and expensive. Sometimes you have to look at it as, okay, guess what? There is an answer. And I say all the time in our preschool transition, I wish I had filed for due process because I just wish that I had an answer. I had 9 months of really, really, really hard discussions, and it taught me a lot. It really geared my career in a different direction. But at some point, for my own health, I wish I had just said, okay, you know what, let's let a judge decide. So I think that's really an important vibe for parents to hear from a teacher's perspective. Let's backtrack a little bit because I want to know kind of about the vibe of your classroom. You posted on Instagram recently a picture of your lovely new paint color.
It's not that bad. It's growing on me.
Okay, good. But tell us, kind of what's your classroom look like? You walk into Miss Lucy's classroom. What's the vibe in there?
Everything is very strategic and like functional. Like someone might just see like a piece of furniture, but like it is in that spot for a specific reason. Like everything has a purpose in our classroom. Everything's just very accessible for the kids, but also we try and keep it as minimal as possible so it's not overstimulating. And like really it's just there's a ton of structure because my students thrive on structure and thrive on routine. There's a ton of schedules and like we do the same thing all the time, but also like we're just like super goofy and like I don't know, we're just like have fun. Like we do like really weird stuff. Like if one of my friends were to come in to observe my classroom, like, what the heck are you doing? Because we're just like super silly, but like they're little kids, like you have to be. And so we keep everything super fun and engaging. Like I don't want the kids to, it's fun. Like they're 3 and 4 years old. So it's not like we're sitting down and doing worksheets and strategic, like that's not how they're gonna learn the best. And that's just like not my style of teaching. Like I'd rather just learn through experiencing things. So
and
we have a good balance between structured, but also just like lightheartedness.
And fun. Yeah. Something that I love, I was scrolling through your Instagram feed not too long ago, and something that I love is that you really teach the kids how to play, which then teaches them how to learn. So Kentucky's regulations, my son went to school in Kentucky, and our regulations have very, very strong focus on play-based preschool. And I suspect South Carolina's do too. Am I right?
Yeah, it's again, they're young. So like a lot of our students need to be taught like what is a functional way to play or how to like engage with their peers, but so much of those skills they learn through experiencing and playing. So like I hear it all the time, like, oh, you just teach kids how to play. Well, no, we're not just teaching them how to play because, okay, we may be playing with blocks, but you're working on so many other skills, communication, social interaction, pre-academic skills, math, literacy, all from stacking 2 blocks. You can work on all those skills. And that's an appropriate like thing to be working with those kids because at that age level, they're playing, they learn through play. So
but like what I loved, and I think parents would love if their schools do it too. So if you hop over to Lucy's Instagram page, which we'll link in the show notes, you'll see this like in your centers, Lucy, you have like a clipboard that says how to play with the blocks, how to play with the Legos. And I so wish that somebody had taught me that with Jack because he didn't know how to do those things and he didn't copy his peers when they were doing them. So consequently, kids would build blocks and he'd be like, oh, this will be fun. I'm going to knock it over. And so, like, actually functionally learning how to play is great. Play-based preschool drove me bonkers because there wasn't any structure. Like, great example of the blending of structure and play, because
Yes.
his was just this like free for all.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really like to curse that often, but I cursed on here the last for the last week, so it was a shit show. Now we just
I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of those classrooms or preschools.
and like he didn't get anything, and it was very dysregulating to him. So I love that you do that, and I think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, you have to have a balance of both. Like, yeah, we're still playing, but it's like structured play. And like the whole purpose of those two are to provide a visual. So like, yes, myself or my assistant can work with them and reference it on their own, but also like, say we have 14 kids at once, which that's never happened, but if we like when there are larger numbers in the classroom, we can't be with every kid at one time. So they have something to independently reference. Or if we see little Johnny over there, he's kind of just like sitting, staring at the blocks. He doesn't know what to do. We can at least tell him like, I'll be with you in a second, reference the sheet and you can look at that to help you then facilitate that. But like, yeah, center time is like huge in our classroom. That's like our big thing. And then we also like will incorporate whatever we did one-on-one into those little rotation or little centers, and they love it because they think they're just playing. They don't think they're learning.
Right. And they're learning independence in addition to that. And it's definitely something that parents can do at home. I have another question about play.
Yes.
And that is like coming from the parent's perspective. We're tired. You're tired. I know you're tired. We just talked about it. And so the question is, how do you, as an adult, as a human, keep the energy and the desire to make it fun, to stay goofy? Like, where do you draw that energy from, and what tips can you give parents to do the same?
Honestly, like just from the kids, because they're so like, to me they're just like so funny and they're so fun like to play with. But yeah, there's times where I'm just like, oh my god, I'm gonna pull my hair out. Like I'll be like, I'm going to the bathroom, but like really I just need to get the heck out of there. But I think just like taking those little breaks for yourself, but just like keep it simple. Don't overthink it. Like, a lot of the times too, my like parents will be like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, you're overthinking it. You're totally overthinking it. Just like go in naturally and let it be an organic flow. And like you can schedule if you're feeling burnt out, like schedule in those times. Like, hey, at 12 o'clock, I'm going to sit down and play with my kid and we're going to do that. So it's very strategic in doing it so you can anticipate it coming, so you can drink your coffee or take the nap beforehand. So then you're energized to do it at that specific time.
That's honestly, I definitely did that. I don't like pretend play, and I remember a therapist told me one time to make it like a Disney movie. So like you make it for the kids, but you also do stuff to entertain yourself. So like you might have, yeah, like
it's 100%. You have to keep yourself entertained because you can only like do the same thing over and over so many times.
Yes, yes. So like I would have, and that's it. Like they need the repetition, but you get so bored with like magnetiles or whatever. So, like this person was like this was a speech therapist that was doing like a conversation between two farm animals. And, one of them said something off color or something. And it like did make me entertained. I still never got good at that, but I loved that lesson for me of like, make it like a Disney movie, put some humor in there for parents. Something else that I do is, and I think I'm certain that you do this too, is like, I find it way easier when I'm doing something that I like. And so, like I'm a really good parent at the pool because I still like to do cannonballs at the pool, and I like to go off the boards, and I like to be silly and like get pushed over and play underwater, like get the diving sticks off the bottom. But like not everybody else likes that. So if it's whether it's tennis or it is pretend play or it's cooking, there's all kinds of opportunity for you to kind of get energy from some other source instead of,
right, especially like at home, like especially as a parent, like find those shared interests and then you guys can like build off of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is a big key to it. And music helps me too, because like, there's nothing like you can't listen to Veggie Tales and not dance.
Yes, yeah. Oh, what's the other guy that we listen to in our classroom all the time? I can't.
Lori Bergner, she's fun.
Yes, yeah, she's amazing. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna drive me. I'll think of it. I can't remember it, but
Okay, you tell us and we'll put it in the show notes.
there's a lot of silly people out there that do really catchy songs, and I'll be like laying in bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm just like, why am I singing this song?
Yes, we've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
So, while we're talking kind of about classroom technicalities, let's talk about differentiation, because I think a lot of parents are really overwhelmed to get started in special education advocacy because they don't know how it works. They don't know how specially designed instruction works. That's the instruction that should be geared towards the child's goals. And they don't know how general education curriculum, or the curriculum that's kind of whole group curriculum, gets differentiated so that their child can access it equitably. So like, give us kind of the nuts and bolts of how your self-contained classroom works in the preschool setting.
So a lot of it has to come from like an understanding of what the child's skill sets are and what their needs are. Like, again, I've been doing this for 7 years, so it kind of just like comes naturally to me. But it's so much of it is just knowing what the kids' goals are, what their needs are, and what they're working towards. And then how can we adapt that to whatever we're doing? So like, for instance, like if we're doing a story, my kids are always on totally different levels. They all have all different skill sets. For reading a story, I don't know, say about apples, like, and we're just looking at the book. We haven't read it yet. I'll like doing like a picture walk, I guess. I would maybe ask one kid to point to the apple. Another kid who I would just ask you just to attend to the book, look at the book. I could ask another kid, what do you think is going to happen in this story? So just gauging, you have to know, I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't know what their skill sets were. So just kind of getting creative and looking at what they could pull from that, like at their own, with their own skill set. And just kind of like, I know it just kind of comes naturally to me when it comes to more like concrete things. Like when you're coming more to academics, it's the same kind of thing. Like if we're looking at the letter A and I want you to identify, the main purpose is to identify the letter A, I might have so and so identify it verbally, you might identify it receptively, you may not even be on, like, know what we're doing with, you might not even be differentiating between numbers and letters. Again, asking this child just to attend to the letter A, I might have another kid trace it with their finger, might have another kid say it, I might have another kid tell me on their talker. It's just, you gotta know what their skill set is, essentially.
Yeah. And so first, step A, know the child, and then step B, meet them where they are and try to up the ante a little bit so that they're making progress.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
That was a way more, you said that way better.
Well, I summarized. Yeah. I usually use more words to explain. That's my style. But something that I talk about a lot, and it was like this huge epiphany when an educator told me this, is part of differentiation is really, and you just explained this, is really looking at the primary learning goal. So we're looking for A. And so everybody can show their understanding of A or their progress toward understanding what A is differently. And some of us need it in a different way, right? So like one kid might be able to find an A and a C of other letters, like in a word search kind of a thing, but a child with visual perception deficits would never be able to do that. Well, it needs to work towards that. Let's never say never. And so we need to, make a less busy paper for that child, because the goal isn't visual perception, it is A.
Right. Yes, exactly. And then that's like when we do part of our, like when we do our rotations, we have like 3 stations and they're one rotations with me. And that's when they get that one-on-one time. Like that's where I do a lot of differentiations because they're all on different skill levels. They're all working on different skill sets. So like I might do an activity with Johnny, but like completely different activity with Emily, but it's the same concept. We're still working on the same skill, but it's just the way it's presented to them is totally different. Because like Johnny might be able to handle that concept on a piece of paper and like do written work. That's great. But Emily's got to have like manipulatives and be able to like move things herself and kind of like put things in and that sort of thing. So it's just, again, knowing your student.
And their learning profile too. It might be that Emily doesn't really, it's really non-preferred to hold that paper.
That's a huge thing too. Yeah. Like, and like I have students that, you know, they don't want to sit in a chair. We're not going to sit in a chair today. And I'm like, that's fine if you don't want to sit in a chair. Like, it's, again, just knowing what they need. I need some students that they have, if we're doing one-on-one work, they have to be moving at all times. So I'm not going to give them a pen and paper worksheet. Like, whatever we're going to do, if we're doing, which we don't really work on syllables or anything, but say we were doing that, I would like have them jump them out instead of them like doing it on paper. It's just, you gotta get creative and work with what that child is good at doing or what is preferred for them. And then the nature of teaching, like sometimes they just have to do non-preferred, but I'll always stick that non-preferred in between two preferreds, because I get it. You don't want to do it. There's lots of things I don't want to do. But if the antecedent and the whatever we're doing after is preferred, it makes the blow of that non-preferred not as bad for them, like not as unenjoyable.
Because you might get a reward or something like that. Yeah, I like for you to explain that, and for teachers to explain that in meetings often, because so many parents, particularly of younger kids, like the kids that you teach, get so nervous about sending their baby there, and how do I know that they're going to be taken care of and that they're going to get the instruction the way that they need it and at the level that they need it and that kind of thing. And that's kind of the dance and the beauty of education. And in my experience, most teachers get that right most of the time. And then and I don't know how you feel about this, so I'll say it and then you can comment back. I think there's also a really important skill in learning how to function in a group. So learning how to be bored, learning how to praise other people when they are doing something differently than you, learning that just being a student and learning that other students learn differently. So kind of the skill of, Jack still needs to work on this, the skill of being bored is also an important skill. Do you agree?
Yes. Oh yeah. And like a lot of the times too, a lot of our students, if they have been in like private therapy prior to being in classroom, like any of their therapies are typically one-on-one. So they become very prompt dependent. And so they don't know how to play on their own, or it's not preferred to play on their own because that isn't how they have been taught. And like, you got to learn to just be bored by yourself with the car. So like, sometimes that's when we're doing like planned ignoring, we're like, I know little Bobby over here, like he's so prompt dependent. I know he knows how to play. He wants me to play with him. So like I get nervous when an admin walks in. I'm like, I'm planned ignoring and not just ignoring him. He's sitting over there doing what he's supposed to do. But like, sure enough, after some time of ignoring him, he'll start to play by himself because he can do it. It's just They become so prompt dependent and they're used to constantly having someone entertaining them. They need to learn how to, like you said, be bored. And I feel like too, now, I mean, when I was a kid, you just went out and played and everything. And like now everyone has iPads and all that stuff. So they're constantly having that input. And so they don't know how to like just not have input.
Which is dysregulating in and of itself. And
Yes.
And I agree with you entirely. And that's definitely something that we work on, and something that I have to reassure parents of so often, because I'm glad that you talked about students that come from settings where they get a lot of one-on-one support. In our case, it wasn't from a therapy center or ABA therapy or something like that. It was because my kids have nannies. And so they, it was somebody's job to do all the puzzles with them and that sort of thing. And we knew it, but, they just became dependent little life suckers.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally just becomes like a waiting game. Like I've had like, say with like doing a puzzle with a kid, they'll just keep looking at me and they'll keep like saying, they'll keep pointing to help, 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 help. And I'll say, I know you want help. You can do it on your own. And sometimes they'll do it immediately. Sometimes we'll sit there for 15 minutes and we'll just stare at each other. But like, and then eventually they'll put it, I'm like, see, you got it. And then they're like, okay, not so bad.
A battle of the wills.
Oh yes, they will test you. And that's like, it's so funny with them because like you know what kids are gonna cave faster than others, and you get some kids that like they will wait you out like no other. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I know you can do this.
Oh, Jack Barlow.
You can't let them read that on your face. You just gotta like,
Right.
and that was the beauty of having masks because like so many times like I would be smiling or like laughing and they wouldn't know because I had a mask on. Like so many times I catch myself having to turn my head because I'm just like,
oh yeah, the mask was a secret weapon. That's true.
oh yeah, oh, yeah.
That is funny. So you just alluded to something that I know is a huge passion of yours, and that is talkers,
Yes.
augmentative alternative communication devices, whatever we want to call them. I know that you really advocate a lot for the use of a talker for some kind of communication device. And before we even kind of dive into this question, I have a lot of clients that say, because I oftentimes recommend one also, or think, should we explore it? And parents say, well, my child communicates, you know, they might communicate.
Yeah, number one thing they say.
But there still are lots of reasons why talkers might be helpful. And by the way, I was one of those parents and somebody talked me into it. And now I have a kid that literally won't shut up. So, you know, why don't you kind of tell everybody what an AAC is and then how you utilize them in your classroom?
So AAC, alternative augmented communication, there's all different forms of it. There's low tech, there's high tech. It can come in the form of like what will be like a communication book. It can come in like switches, which are like buttons. It can come in like eye gaze devices. There's hundreds and thousands of different things out there, depending on what that child needs. We use those devices for one of two purposes. One, it's because that is that child's sole means of communication. That's how they're going to communicate. We want to obviously, when we talk about language, we say expressive and receptive. So expressive is that that verbal output, and receptive would be like them like pointing. Obviously, our end goal is always to be fluent expressively and have that expressive language. And that's what we always work for. But, you know, some kids, we may not foresee that anytime soon. So we really want to get them on those devices. So that's going to be their main form of communication. Other times it's to bridge the gap. So you like have a kid that you're already talking, the device will help them expand their language. Also, it will help with articulation. So many times that parents are saying, well, my kid talks. Well, you understand them, but nobody else might understand them. And that's where like it kind of enables them, because they might be like saying gibberish, like blah, 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 but they are like, oh, you want chicken nuggets? Well, how is someone else supposed to know that? And so you want them to be able to communicate and generalize that skill across all settings. So with the help of the communication device, it helps promote that language, and it helps with proper articulation, because a lot of using these devices is model. So you're modeling that language. So, and that's, we kind of, in my classroom, we kind of have both. It always depends. But I get kids all the time. My parents be like, he's talking, he doesn't need a device. I'm like, well, it would help to promote that language. And then by the end of the year, the child won't zip it. And they're like, why did you do this to me? But like a lot of it, it's hard to get parents on board for these devices. It's hard. Like I even know some teachers that like aren't on board with it.
Yeah, a lot.
And I think too, it's, you know, some people will like say like, oh, well, he signs, but signing isn't a generalization skill. So like, for instance, if you have a communication book, like we do a lot of flip and talks. If a child has is going to McDonald's and they're going to sign hamburger. Well, that person has no idea what you're saying hamburger. They don't speak ASL. But if you have a book that has a device with a picture and the word, it's more universal. So the purpose of them is mainly to generalize that skills and to make it more functional across more settings so they can be more inclusive, so they can have those conversations with other people outside their little bubble.
Yeah. And that's a really beautiful description. I love that description. So the reason why I wanted to talk her was because Jack was missing, we ended up calling them sticky words, but he was missing prepositions and articles and like the little words that make language actual language. Right. So he could say, I want chocolate milk, but he couldn't, well, that is a sentence, but he couldn't say like, I want chocolate milk and it's over there, or, you know, he couldn't like put anything into concept, and he was
expand those more multiple word utterances.
Yeah, exactly. And so and I thought reading would do it. So I held off on a talker because I thought once he sees he has to read and the and to enough, it'll start to happen, but it didn't. My intuition was wrong on that. And I think it's because he couldn't get enough repetition with reading.
That's what all devices are, repetition. And that's what I tell every parent when we do a training. I'm like, you're going to say these words till you're blue in the face and you like are going to hate it. But guess what? That's what your kid needs. Like you could repeat the same thing over and over and over and over again, but that exposure and that repetition, maybe on the 800th time, it's going to click. And then that's why that's bridging the gap and promoting that language.
Well, and what's so interesting is just yesterday, he's 11. He started with a talker probably when he was 7 or 8. And we don't use it that often. He still does use it in speech for therapeutic purposes. But I was getting out of the bathtub and he said, Mom, what are you doing? And I said, what am I doing? And he like paused and asked me for help with the prepositions, because that sentence has a lot, like I am getting out of the bathtub. And so he paused and asked me for help, and I would prompt him word by word. And then I said, you're right, Jack, I am getting out of the bathtub. And then he did it. And so like him slowing down and wanting those words in the right order with the prepositional phrases was like, it was almost like you could see the sentence diagram in his brain. It was so cool.
And it was really important that you said about the slowing down too, because I'll get kiddos that like, that helps them slow down to form those proper sentences. Cause like their mind's going a mile a minute and they're trying to shoot out all these words, but like it's just like verbal diarrhea, like slow down. And when you have that device, it gives them something concrete and like tangible to help them slow down and like think out the sentence and not just like spit all out once too.
Yeah. So this is really interesting. And I made this connection way after my doctor said it, but, and then we'll move on because other people might not geek out about this like we did.
Okay.
So I was like having to chart a lot of like negative health stuff, like what my weight was. That's always negative. Like my weight and where I had aches and pains. I have some autoimmunity stuff. So like, all the negative stuff. And I said to my doctor, I just feel like it's a lot of negative energy. And this is an integrative doctor that really understands kind of the mind-body connection. And she explained to me that what she ultimately had me do was write 3 things for which I was grateful every day, or 3 good things that happened every day. And I'm really positive, so that's no problem at all. But she said, basically, if you take something joyful and move it from like here's where I find joy part of your brain, and you write it, you are activating it in a different way. And so your brain is saying, oh, we're taking joy and now we're going to do something with joy. We're going to manipulate it, which then helps you express that joy better, or gratitude, or whatever the positive emotion is. And similarly, if you take something that is negative, like write down your worries, you're moving it from the worry center to the writing center. And that has a functional effect. And that is something that's been studied. And it really later got me thinking about a talker and how like we communicate with our brain and our mouth and our motor skills. And there's so much that's happening when we're communicating, obviously the language centers. But But if we then also include our hands, like we do with ASL and like we do with a talker, we are moving the language, we're activating something else, which will eventually start to ingrain it into our motor planning systems, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's super fascinating. One thing before we hop over to back over to advocacy, because I have a couple of more questions about that. And so that is pragmatics. You know, I really preach pragmatics. I think it's super important in preschool. So, how do you help kids do self advocacy skills and pragmatic speech with communication devices?
I mean, honestly, just through modeling and just constant exposure, the same way we would do any form of language. It's just constant repetition, modeling. Like I said, you'll do it till you're blue in the face, but they just, in giving them the opportunities to practice those pragmatic skills. Um, it all kind of like goes hand in hand, and also doing it like in natural scenarios too. Like if like a kid is hurt, we can teach them like you need to ask for help, or I need to ask for something. So using those natural experiences kind of, and just constant modeling, constant,
Yeah.
constant.
And if they learn it as it happens, then it becomes so much more functional.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so then the next time, hopefully that they'll be able to apply at least one or two of those words that we had modeled, kind of thing.
Right. Right. Yeah. Except if they're hurt and they can't find their talker. And I remember
Right.
it happened to Jack so much. He would want to say something. He'd be like, iPad.
Well, we have, at least in our classroom, like we just like totally bombard them with language. So like I think I mentioned, majority of my students, sometimes we have kids on switches, sometimes they're on eye gaze devices, but majority of my students have like low tech flip and talk books.
Yeah.
And so it's essentially, it has a core board with frames. So we have them, they have their own personal device, but then we have them throughout the entire classroom. So they're in every center, they're in the bathroom, they're in the calm down corner, they're with the playground, they're like, they're everywhere, so that they never have to like worry about like, oh, you don't have your device with you, like next to you in a second. All right, I'm going to grab this board right here and we're going to use this one right here. So
Right.
it's always, we're like a lot of proactive instead of reactive in our classroom.
And I also know that you attach them to yourself. You have them on your badge.
Oh yeah, we have them everywhere. They're literally, we just like, well, we're in the hallway too, like I just whip it out because we don't always have it. And we had one too made for our playground too, because we were having kids bringing them out to the playground. They just got like totally destroyed.
Right. Right.
And it's interesting too, because like, especially at the beginning of the year, now we've had this, I think we've had it like 3 years. The like we share the playground with kindergarten and the general education preschool or classroom. So like they'll come out and they'll be super interested in it. They're like, what's this? And it's like a really good segue to have them like be inclusive and like, you know, like not everyone can talk verbally. Some kids have to do. So it's a good learning tool, not just for our class, but for others. And then my kids benefit because then they can socialize and communicate that way too.
Yeah, it's so that is such a great undercurrent to any kind of device that somebody needs in order to make learning and life equitable to them. So let's hop over, because that kind of is a nice segue back over to advocacy. And I know it's a passion of yours, but why really is advocating for your students and teaching their parents how to advocate? Why is that such a passion for you?
I think, well, it's two things. It was basically the way I was raised, essentially. My mom was a social worker. She was literally an advocate. She worked for CASA, court appointed special advocates. So she was an advocate herself. Had foster children in and out of our home all the time. So she is a huge part of that. But also she taught me to be my own self advocate, because I was diagnosed with OCD and anxiety. Well, my parents knew from day one, like something was up. I was a little temperamental as a child. But I think I got officially diagnosed like going into fourth grade. I want to say third grade.
I was in fourth grade when I had my first ulcer. So you and I are wired similarly.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, I mean, they knew something was up. Like it was like I was having, to them, they thought they were just tantrums, but they were panic attacks
Yeah.
all the time about like totally irrational things. So they knew something was up to begin with. But I had to learn basically, and my mom instilled it in me to be my own advocate because, it happened a lot more in high school than it did in elementary school, but like a lot of teachers, unfortunately, would just like, oh, she's looking for attention, or oh, she's trying to get out of work. Like if I said I needed to leave the room because I was going to have a panic attack, they were like, she just doesn't want to do it. It's escape. I'm like, it's escape from this classroom because I'm going to have a panic attack. It's not escape from the work. And so there were unfortunately times where I had to sit down, like more so in high school because I came more into that, sit down with teachers and be like, this is what I need for me to be successful. And a lot of times they were understanding. And unfortunately, like there was one or two that like weren't, but like your loss, not mine. Like I still was successful. So I had to do a lot of advocating for myself. And I think too, I become very passionate, like, and that's part of why I am a special ed teacher, is because I see a lot of my kids in myself, and like being like 3 and 4 years old, these students don't necessarily have the skills to advocate for themselves. So I have to do it for them. Same thing with like, and it goes hand in hand with their parents. It goes back to them not necessarily knowing what is available to them and not knowing the special education system. If they don't know it, no one's going to tell, like I have to help them. Like I have to advocate for them because they need to get what they need to be successful. And like, I'm not someone that can just kind of like sit around and like let things like, oh, it's okay if I know something like needs to be done and it's like morally right, I'm not going to go to bed. Like I can't fall asleep unless I know it's done, kind of thing.
Well, and yeah, my advocacy style comes from a very similar situation. I think, you experience it, and so you can really empathize.
Right.
And in my life story, I have had similar experiences that have given me that kind of empathy. But something that I think, there's kind of this undertone there of that's not comfortable, and so sometimes we have to have a little bit of conflict. We have to have a little bit of discomfort. It's not comfortable to walk up to somebody and say, this is what I need, or this is what my child needs. And so, I think, I wonder what advice you have for parents about kind of overcoming that discomfort, which I think you would agree is necessary in order to
Yeah, for
advocate.
sure. I think it goes back to that communication, like building a solid relationship with your child's teacher from day one, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to be helpful. Like they want to help you. That's their job, to help you and your child. But just having some of those conversations can be harder to have if you don't already have that relationship. So I'm not saying you need to like barge in the door and ask for this, that, and whatever, but you can still ask questions that will lead up to it. So, kind of opening those doors if you're not fully comfortable doing it right away, or just, you don't necessarily even have to ask that teacher directly for what they need. Like you can ask the teacher for resources of where they can find it outside, and 9 times out of 10, they'll be happy to give it to you. I get it can be intimidating because like they might see us as this like well of knowledge because we have all this information, but we have this information for you. So like, again, I think it comes back to that relationship and knowing, like having that trust in between us, because if you don't have that trust to ask me, then you might not trust what I have to say, kind of thing. So it's just that like mutual respect and communication.
I think it's so important for people to hear it, because that's what I say on almost every single episode. No matter where we come to, we talk about relationships, we talk about trust, we talk about communication. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so good to hear it from the school perspective, that that's what you want. You aren't out to get us.
No.
The school people want to help.
And I get it. Like some, like even to me, some admin, like, you guys are intimidating. You scare me. Like I get it, because like they're like in this power position, whatever. But like at the end of the day, like we're all human. Like it's basic social. It's the same skills we teach my students. It's the same thing of teaching like mutual respect and communication. So like just how like we said at the table, at like the IEP table, if you guys disagree on something, as long as you have that relationship and that trust, you can work through it. It's just where I get where, especially when, and I had this issue too, because I am younger than most of my students' parents, and like I don't have children of my own. Like there's sometimes there is a mistrust there because they're like, well, you don't have kids, you don't know what you're talking about, kind of thing. And like I don't take offense to it, because I would probably say the same thing. Like, yeah, you're literally dropping off this child with a complete stranger. You have no idea who I am. You have no idea my credentials. But that's why from day one, like I invite the student and the parent to come in, to come talk to me, come see the classroom before school starts, ask me any questions you want to ask. Like it don't, like, it doesn't matter. Like I'll talk to you on the phone. With COVID, it was kind of harder. And I would just like, I would have hour, 2 hour long conversations before I've even met your child about like our program, but just to make them feel more comfortable, because usually with preschool, it's the first time they're dropping their kid off at school if they haven't already been to daycare. And it's more hard on the parent than it is the kid. And that's why I always say, I tell every parent prior to drop off, we are ripping off the Band-Aid. I know you're going to cry. Your child might cry too. I swear to you, we will love them. I will send you a picture or a video every hour on the first day of school, so you know they are okay. And that's what I have to do with some parents, just because like it's their reassure, like they're so scared. But like after that first day, and like they're like, oh, she actually did send the picture. Okay, she's safe. And then like they're fine the rest of the year.
Yeah,
But like,
that's a really great thing for you to do also. Lucy, you are amazing. We need more teachers like you. There are lots of teachers like you out there. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and your passion with us. Tell everybody where they can find you, because you've got some really great resources out there yourself.
I'm kind of all over the place. So I like, the main thing that I upkeep is my Instagram. So it's at the alternative way to pre-K is my Instagram. And then I also have a website, thealternativewaytoprek.com. And that's like my blog. So I do have a lot of resources, not just for teachers, like for parents too. A lot of those things can be applied for parents as well. And then I also sell some teacher resources. So if you're a teacher listening, I have a Teachers Pay Teachers. Again, it's teacherspayteachers.com/the alternative way to pre-K.
Yay. Thank you so much. This has been really helpful.
Yes, of course, anytime.